everybody, welcome to Unit 7. This is the MESH unit. And the MESH unit is called that because it covers motivation, emotion, stress, and health. Each one of those, it really boils down to three things: motivation, emotion, and then stress and health kind of go together. But College Board has decided to make these one big unit, so that is what we're going to that's how we're going to organize it as well. But we're still going to kind of notice some of these subtopic groupings. And so the first one is indeed motivation. 2 slides worth of learning targets for you. And really this covers all of the emotion stuff. I don't think I'm covering all of these in just this lecture. Okay, definition of motivation. The influences that account for the initiation, direction, intensity, and persistence of behavior. You might be saying to yourself, huh? In other words, it's the things that, or it's the reasons why we do what we do. So the influences, the reasons that are behind our behaviors. So what makes us do what we do? It could be a piece of chocolate. It could be for money. It could be that we do what we do to make someone happy. We'll get into a lot more examples in just a second, but an extreme example of motivation is the story of Aaron Ralston, who was motivated to cut his arm to free himself from a boulder. So he was in some sort of rock climbing incident in Utah, I believe, and he was trapped under a boulder for about 5 days, and he had to cut off his own arm to free himself. The movie 127 Hours covers his very interesting story of motivation. Okay, so let's get back to those examples. What are some of our sources of motivation? They might be biological, emotional, cognitive, or social. My little emojis here give you some of these ideas or some examples for each of these ideas, including things like food and sleep, being able to feel good or to feel less bad, or maybe if you're feeling angry, that's going to motivate you to a certain type of behavior, or feeling sad is going to motivate you to a certain type of behavior. And then there's cognitive factors when you're just thinking logically of like, hey, if I can do my homework right now, or if I can record this lecture right now, then maybe I can go to bed at a reasonable time because I was really tired today. Or maybe a cognitive factor in terms of I need to study my work to learn my material. So some sort of logic, thought-based reason. And then social factors, I need to make someone happy. I am being pressured by my peers or other people around me. And for love and acceptance and other things like that, I am going to behave the way that I am. Before we get too deep into this, we're going to just kind of define a few words. And they all tend to be, I believe all 4 of them tend to be biological in nature. And they definitely all overlap, but we're going to still define them separately. They might seem like things that you already know, but we want to make sure we're really understanding them in the context of psych. So let's start with an instinct. We're going to talk about push and pull factors in motivation. And anytime you hear a reference to a push, it's something internal, something inside your thoughts, inside your biology, inside your genes is going to push you to act in a certain way. So these are innate. This is an innate automatic disposition. So like born in you automatic motivation or state of mind to respond in a particular way to a specific stimulus. It's important to note that these are natural and not learned. For example, decide whether or not you need to write down these examples. Birds build nests and salmons spawn. Okay, these are both instincts that these animals possess because they can do them perfectly the first time, which makes us think that these are ingrained in their genetic code. So what is something that an animal or a human does naturally and accurately the first time? Next, let's define needs and drives. And I am going to define them separately, but they really do have to go together. You'll see why as we talk through this here. A need is anything an individual body, person, organism, subject needs to survive, not the species. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but not talking about a human race or a species of animal. A need is something a single body needs to survive. Things like food, water, and shelter, and others. These are things that bring us to a state of homeostasis. I hope you know that word, but if you don't, it is a steady internal state. So it's the state our body needs to be in to be healthy and survive. Drives are physical motivators controlled by our hypothalamus in our brain. And it is those internal urges that drive us to fulfill our needs. So if we need food, the drive is hunger. If our body is overheated, that is going to drive us to want to get water and cool down. Okay, so drives push us to get what we need to maintain homeostasis. Let's take a look at this next slide. Or this diagram. Let's say part of our homeostasis is a normal body temperature, roughly 97 degrees Fahrenheit. If we do an activity, let's say jog 2 miles, our body temperature goes up. We are no longer in homeostasis. And so our body needs to get back to this normal body temperature. So we might have a drive to slow down. Our body will start to sweat and we can regain that homeostasis. If we dive into a cold pool, then our body temperature decreases, throwing off our homeostasis. And then we have a need to get back to normal body temperature. So our body has this drive, this action it takes to help us get us there. An incentive, on the other hand, this is one that's not necessarily biological like the other ones are. This is a pull factor. So this is something that does not come simply from your thoughts or from your body's reactions to something. It is something from the external world, the environment. It is a positive or negative stimuli that pulls our behavior in one way or another to satisfy our needs. So we still might be meeting a biological need, but it's something from outside of our own bodies that we're striving for. It has the potential to motivate our behavior. Incentives do not always motivate our behavior, but it has the potential to do so. So where our needs and drives push us into action, an incentive might pull us. Okay, motivation is going to break down into 5, and I actually feel like in your notes there's 6. I might need to update this. I think it's 6 theories of motivation. I am missing the incentive theory. Speaking of incentives. So, pretend it says incentive theory right here. Okay, our first theory is the evolutionary theory, which would state that all human behavior is based on motivation to survive so we can spread our genes. And that, again, all behavior comes from that motivation. You can ignore this reference. We're going to talk about this in class. So if you're watching this on YouTube, this might not be relevant to you. But think about that. Does everything you do have to do with spreading your genes or surviving? I beg to differ. And that's a key here. This idea that all motivation derives from that. We're going to come up with lots of examples how that is not true. So what are some of the problems with this theory? Well, the idea is that humans don't have very many instincts. In fact, some people claim that humans don't have any instincts, that everything we do is learned. And is there anything that we do right the first time? And so psychologists have said that instincts are not as common with humans as with other species. And yes, we might naturally feel like we learn how to crawl and walk, but we still have to learn how to do that. We don't do it right and perfect the first time. Another piece of evidence in terms of the theory, in terms of problems with this theory, is that babies' reflexes tend to dissipate over time. So we just got done learning about what babies' reflexes are, including being able to root to look for food, or and their startle reflex, their whole body kind of goes out for attention and then comes back together if it's scared. He or she is scared. But that instinctual behavior or reflex, if you want to call it that, fades. Babies don't continue to do that. And so if it was such an instinct, wouldn't that be something that continues on if we're comparing it to other species? And so most psychologists believe that behavior is directed by both physiological and psychological forces, which you're going to continue to see as we go on. The drive reduction theory states that motivation is all human behavior's motivation is to fix imbalances in homeostasis. So again, there's a heavy emphasis on the biological piece of this. Our body creates a need. Okay, let's say we jump into that really cold pool. Okay, and the brain responds by creating a drive. How do I get my body temperature up? And that prompts the organism to take action, maybe to get out of the pool. Okay, so another example, a need might be a need for food or water. The drive is that hunger and thirst. And so drive reduction theory would claim that this will boil down to a drive reducing behavior to fix it. The action taken, which is eating and drinking. So to label this, the need, the drive, and then this is the action being taken to address that drive and satisfy that need. This is a push motivation. This is internal. This comes from within. So even if there's a cognitive component, it still comes from an internal need. There's that word again. Next is the incentive theory, which states that all human behavior's motivation comes to gain a reward for a given behavior. And the intent by offering the reward, whether to yourself or someone else is offering it to you, is to cause that behavior to reoccur. This is a pull. This is external. Incentives are external from the outside environment. And so in this case, our needs and drives pull us into action. So if we think of something like wages or vacation or extra credit, you go to work to get your hourly wage. You, if you are a salaried employee, maybe you're working for so many years because then you get more vacation days. Maybe you show up to a study Kahoot session for extra credit. So what is pulling you? What from the outside world is pulling you to make the choices that you're making? The hard thing about incentives is that the value can be influenced by biological and cognitive factors. So food might not be a great incentive if you've already been fed and you're not hungry. Let's see, a cognitive factor, if you tell me that if I get my recording here done tonight, I can go watch my favorite Star Wars movie. In other words, incentives are not the same for all people. They are, and even within one person, they are not the same on a day-to-day or minute-to-minute basis. Optimum arousal theory states that your motivation is to seek out an ideal or an optimum level of arousal and not to eliminate it altogether. This one's probably the hardest to understand just based on the definition. So kind of just go with it and hear me out on the whole thing. There is a law that is part of the optimum arousal theory, and yes, you need to learn them together. And the Yerkes Dodson Law says that humans perform best when arousal is moderate. So what you're constantly motivated to do is to find something that's a little bit more interesting than being bored, but not so interesting or taxing that it stresses you out. So you are constantly working to find an activity or a person or a behavior that keeps you interested and keeps you focused and keeps you at a heightened level of arousal, but is not so hard that it becomes stressful and you get really, it becomes almost impossible to do, and then you suck at the thing you're trying to do. I'm going to try to explain this using this graph and an example. And I'm going to pick something like writing my name on a piece of paper. Okay. According to the Yerkes Dodson Law, writing my name on a piece of paper, it's an extremely easy task. And so I'm going to have a very low arousal. I'm not going to be very motivated to do it. If I do it, I'm probably going to do it with, I don't know, kind of sloppy. Okay. But as I get more like motivation to write my name, like if you sign your name on this check, you're going to get $1,000 in your bank account. Well, at this point, my arousal's peaked. I've got a great level of motivation, and I'm going to make sure I'm signing my name really carefully. Okay. If I take a different example, let's say I want to slam dunk a basketball. For me, I might not be very interested because it's going to be really hard for me to do. It's a very difficult task. And in fact, the more chill I am, maybe I'll do okay if I'm just like listening and getting some tips from someone. But as the stakes get higher, as I get more and more nervous, as my heart rate increases, as I maybe start to sweat, or my breathing increases, the performance, my ability to do that thing, and my motivation to do that thing is probably going to drop. So in the Yerkes Dodson Law, which we have to learn in the context of the optimum arousal theory, the more difficult the tasks require less arousal. So I need to be calm when something's really hard. But the easier tasks require high arousal. I need to have something pushing me to be interested in doing it. It's a little bit of a tricky theory. Hopefully we'll get some time to practice this a little bit better in class. Okay, let's talk about Maslow's hierarchy. There is a good chance that if you have attended high school and if you've ever met Mr. Carpenter, you know what this is. He's a big fan. But basically, it says that all of our behavior motivations are based on our need to be secure. Okay, to be secure and to strive for the next level of this hierarchy of needs that Maslow claims that we need and want. Okay, and that we start at the bottom and we work our way up. There are a lot of criticisms for this theory because theory is a bit arbitrary and we can find lots of exceptions to the rules. But let's go through it first. What he would say is that we first start off with a biological and physiological need. And quite frankly, most theories seem to back this up. We need air, food, drink, shelter, warmth, sex, sleep, etc. And that we really can't worry about any of these other things until we have that basic thing taken care of. Makes sense. If you don't have air, if you don't have food, if you don't have water, you're not going to care about your self-esteem. But once you do have those things, now you can start to worry about the next level, which is safety needs. Are you safe where you are? Is it stable? Is it orderly? Or is it chaotic? And once that need is met, then you can worry about the status of your friends and your family and your need to feel loved, accepted, belonged. From there, you can build on your self-esteem and your reputation and strive for your goals. And then the pinnacle of Maslow's pyramid is self-actualization. That if you've met all of these other needs and your motivation has driven you to accomplish this and this and this and this and this, you will reach self-actualization, which is the ultimate in personal growth and fulfillment. Some theories even add on, or some editions of this even add on self-transcendence, which is a fancy word, meaning to find meaning beyond yourself. So, I don't know, some sort of spiritual meaning. But the thing is that we can always come up with different examples for this. Like we would say, like you could think of a mom who's willing to throw herself in front of a moving bus to protect her baby. In that case, she is putting her love for her family above her own safety needs. Or you might argue that your esteem needs are so much a part of who you are that you can't find security and stability if you don't feel strong in your sense of self. Okay, so there are definitely some flaws to this theory. Okay, our final theory is the cognitive dissonance theory. And this theory states that our motivation is simply to make our beliefs and actions align. That the steps we take and the justifications we have for our behavior are to make our beliefs and actions match up. For example, perhaps you believe that smoking and vaping is bad for you. Maybe you've seen commercials, you've had discussions, you've read articles that smoking and or vaping is bad for you. Yet, maybe you do it anyways. I hope you don't, but maybe. In the cognitive dissonance, theory, the motivation comes from feeling uncomfortable with that, basically hypocrisy in yourself. And that uncomfortableness motivates you to change either your actions or your beliefs. And so the motivations for our behavior is to line up basically what we feel and what we do. That wraps up our intro to motivation discussion. And I guess my final note is that just like so many things in psychology, there's probably not one theory that seems to explain all human behavior. But in different scenarios and different situations, one of these theories probably fits to explain why someone does what they do. Okay, that's it.